A small observatory was floating far away from the busy heart of human civilization, hidden at the edge of space. Its job was simple: to listen. Day after day, year after year, it picked up signals from the stars. Radio waves, cosmic whispers, old transmissions from dead colonies, and sometimes strange noises that no one could explain. Most of them were harmless, but one night something changed. The machine caught a signal that wasn't supposed to exist, a desperate voice calling for help. Broken, terrified, and fading fast. The technicians at the observatory thought it was just interference at first. The message was full of static and distortion, like someone screaming through a storm. But when they slowed it down and cleaned the audio, they heard words that sent a chill through the room. "They are coming. We are dying. Help us." Everyone in that room went silent. It wasn't just the message that scared them, it was the source. The signal came from a planet long forgotten by the galaxy, a place marked on ancient maps as a death world. A death world was not a normal planet. It was a place where everything, from the air to the soil to the animals, wanted you dead. The gravity was heavier, the storms were stronger, and the life forms were beyond cruel. Only the toughest beings could live there, and those who did were feared by the rest of the galaxy. The record said that the colony on that planet had vanished decades ago after a strange event. No one dared to go back, but now that same world was crying for help, and that made no sense at all. The duty officer on shift sent the message up the chain, unsure what to do. By the time morning came, every communication center and intelligence network on Earth had heard about it. Military experts, scientists, and diplomats gathered to discuss what it meant. Some said it was a trap, a fake distress call meant to lure ships into danger. Others believed it was real, a cry from survivors who had been stranded for years. Nobody could agree. As the data came in, more details appeared. The SOS was old, but still repeating. It seemed to be bouncing between damaged satellites, losing strength each time. The transmission carried the unique frequency codes used by the original colonists. Whoever had sent it had known the old Earth protocols. That meant they were either descendants of the colonists or someone who had found their equipment. The mystery deepened. In one control room, an old technician named Mark kept listening to the message again and again. He had spent his life studying old colonies and forgotten signals. He noticed something strange in the background of the transmission, a pattern that didn't belong. Between the words, there were bursts of mechanical noise like metal grinding and engines roaring. When he filtered it out, he realized it wasn't just noise. It was another signal hidden under the first, a foreign code repeating endlessly. He didn't know what it said, but it sounded like a warning from something non-human. By now, rumors had spread through the fleet networks. Soldiers, pilots, and engineers whispered about the Death World signal. Some said the planet had been attacked by machines that ate everything alive. Others claimed it was haunted by the ghosts of those who had died there. But no matter what version they believed, everyone felt the same chill. The kind of unease that comes when the universe suddenly feels too big and too dark. Meanwhile, on Earth, the Defense Command gathered in their steel meeting chamber. Massive screens displayed the Death World's last known coordinates. The general in charge, a woman named Admiral Rhea Koran, stood at the front, her eyes fixed on the slowly flickering hologram. She had fought in dozens of wars but had never seen a Death World transmission before. When her communications officer played the message aloud, the room went quiet except for the desperate voice echoing through the speakers. "They are coming. We are dying. Help us." Those words repeated again and again until the recording cut out with a burst of static. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, a younger officer broke the silence. He asked if the fleet should respond. The admiral didn't answer right away. She just looked out the window at the blackness of space beyond Earth's orbit. The stars looked peaceful, but she knew better. Space was never peaceful. She remembered the stories from her childhood, how humanity had once been called Deathworlders because of their violent home planet. Earth had once been considered unlivable by alien standards, full of storms, predators, and diseases, and yet humans had survived, adapted, and thrived. That was why they were feared and respected. But that fear had also made the galaxy keep its distance. Now, after centuries of uneasy peace, this signal was testing that fragile balance. Some members of the Galactic Council warned them not to interfere. "The Deathworlders bring destruction wherever they go," they said. "If you send ships, war will follow." But others argued that ignoring a cry for help was worse. "If it were your people," one human ambassador replied coldly, "would you do nothing?" As the debate raged, time was running out. The signal was growing weaker by the hour. It might vanish forever if they waited too long. Back at the observatory, Mark sent one final data packet to command, an image reconstructed from the signal's encoded layers. It showed the surface of the Death World, captured by an ancient orbital drone. The picture was blurry, but one detail was unmistakable: cities on fire, skies choked with black smoke, and shapes moving in the flames, tall, metallic, and alien. The scientists confirmed that the planet's atmosphere was filled with radioactive particles and strange energy readings. Whatever was happening there wasn't natural. It was a war, and it had already begun. Late at night, Admiral Corrin sat alone in her office, replaying the SOS one more time. She could hear the panic, the chaos, the sheer desperation of the voices. It wasn't just fear. It was the sound of people fighting to stay alive. She thought about the old oaths that all Deathworlder soldiers once swore. "We do not run from cries for help, no matter how far they come from." That promise had been the soul of humanity long before the stars were ever reached. Outside her window, the lights of the orbital dockyard shimmered like a sea of stars. Ships rested in silence, waiting for orders that might never come. She knew what would happen if she gave the command. It would not be a small mission. It would be a fleet, thousands of lives sent into a place where death itself ruled. But she also knew that if they did nothing, the guilt would haunt them forever. The next morning, a quiet order was sent through encrypted channels. The fleet would prepare for immediate readiness. The news didn't go public, but among the soldiers, word spread fast. Pilots started checking their ships. Engineers began loading supplies. Medical crews stocked their bays. They didn't know where they were going or what they would face, only that it was something big. At the observatory, the technicians continued listening to the SOS. It kept repeating, slower now, as if fading away into the void. But just before it weakened completely, a new voice joined the transmission, calm, steady, and almost resigned. It said, "If anyone hears us, tell them we held the line." Then the signal ended. The silence afterward was worse than the message itself. Everyone who heard it knew what that meant. The Deathworlders had always been known for one thing: they never begged. If they were calling for help, it meant the situation was beyond hope. Admiral Corrin received the final signal data and closed her eyes for a long moment. Then she stood and walked toward the command bridge. Her officers looked at her, waiting for her decision. She gave only one order: prepare the fleet. No one gets left behind. And as the engines of the Deathworlder fleet roared to life, a new chapter began. One that would shake the galaxy and remind everyone what it truly meant when humanity answered a call for help. The message from the Deathworld had reached every corner of the Galactic Council. In the great circular hall of the council station, thousands of voices argued at once. Holograms of alien leaders flickered in the air, their faces showing worry, fear, and doubt. For many of them, the name Deathworld brought back dark memories. They remembered the time when humans were new to the stars, wild and unpredictable, fighting for survival on planets that others wouldn't even dare to visit. The galaxy had called them Deathworlders because their home Earth was a planet of storms, beasts, and chaos. And now those same people were being asked to help another world that shared their cursed name. At the center of the council chamber stood Admiral Rhea Corrin, calm but stern. Her gray uniform was pressed, her eyes cold as steel. Around her, the noise of the council sounded like a storm, but she didn't move. One alien leader, a tall bird-like creature from the planet Teshra, shouted that the Deathworld signal could be a trap. "They bring only fire and destruction," he said. "If you send your fleet, you risk all of us." Another delegate from a peaceful water world spoke softly. "What if it is not a trap?" she asked. "What if they truly need help?" The room fell quiet for a second, but then the shouting began again. Everyone wanted to be heard. Some demanded investigation first. Others said it wasn't worth the risk. The galaxy had seen too many wars, and no one wanted another one. Rhea listened silently, her jaw tightening with every passing minute. She could feel the same old fear in their voices. Fear of humans, fear of action, fear of responsibility. Finally, the human ambassador stood up. His voice was calm but filled with emotion. "You all speak of fear," he said. "But while you debate, people are dying. If we turn our backs on them, then what right do we have to call ourselves civilized?" The hall grew still. Even those who hated humanity could not deny the truth in his words. After hours of discussion, the council still could not agree. They voted to delay action until more information could be gathered. But Rhea Corrin had already made her decision. She wasn't going to wait for permission from politicians who had never seen real war. She knew what delay meant. Every hour they waited, more lives were lost. She left the council hall without saying a word. Outside, in the corridor lined with glass walls, she could see the stars stretching forever. Somewhere out there, a planet was burning. Somewhere, people were screaming for help that might never come. She clenched her fist and whispered to herself, "Not this time." Back on Earth, the mood was tense. News of the signal had leaked through unofficial channels. People filled the streets demanding answers. Was humanity going to help? Or were they going to stand by and watch another civilization die? On every broadcast screen, experts argued. Some said sending a fleet would start a galactic war. Others said ignoring the call would destroy humanity's soul. In the military headquarters, soldiers and officers gathered around strategy tables. Maps of the death world glowed on screens, covered in red markers showing areas of unknown energy. The scientists had confirmed it. The planet was under attack by something mechanical. Machines that spread like a virus, eating everything in their path. No one knew who built them or where they came from. All they knew was that they were fast, merciless, and unstoppable once they landed. Admiral Corrin entered the command room and the officers stood at attention. She looked around the table, her eyes scanning the faces of men and women who had fought beside her for decades. "You've all heard the signal," she said quietly. "You know what's happening." A few nodded. "Command wants to wait," she continued. "But if we wait, there will be no one left to save." The room stayed silent for a long time. Then an old general spoke up. "How many ships are you thinking?" he asked. Rhea's answer was simple. "All of them." There was a gasp. Even her closest advisors looked shocked. "That's not a rescue mission," someone said. "That's a full-scale war deployment." She nodded. "Exactly. We don't know what we're walking into, and I won't send half a force to die. We go prepared or we don't go at all." Her words carried weight. The officers looked at one another and saw the truth. There was no middle ground. Either they saved those people or they let an entire world burn. Slowly, one by one, they saluted. Within hours, orders began to flow through the fleet networks. Across space docks and planetary bases, engines came alive. Crews were called back from leave, ships rearmed, supply chains reactivated. The old war factories, silent for decades, began to hum again. Giant carriers floated above the blue curve of Earth, their metal skins glistening in the sunlight. Everywhere, people felt the same mix of fear and pride. The Deathworlders were moving again, not to conquer, but to protect. To the rest of the galaxy, it felt like a sleeping beast awakening. In the hangars, pilots checked their crafts while engineers loaded ammunition. Soldiers packed rations, whispered to their families over video calls, and promised to come back. Most of them knew they might not. But they also knew why they were going. Humanity had always answered when someone called for help, even if it meant walking into hell. Rhea visited the launch bay where her flagship, the Resolute, waited. It was an old ship, heavy and scarred from past battles. She ran her hand along the hull, remembering the faces of those she'd lost before. War never got easier. She wished it did. Her first officer, Captain Marin Holt, approached her. "Fleet Command still hasn't given full approval," he said softly. "They're saying we need a formal vote." Rhea smiled faintly. "By the time they vote, we'll already be there." He looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "Then I'd better make sure the engines don't fail us." Across the galaxy, other Deathworlder fleets were also receiving fragments of the SOS. Some were deep in exploration missions, others stationed at border patrols. When they learned of Earth's mobilization, they volunteered without hesitation. The call spread faster than any official order could. It wasn't just about one planet anymore. It was about a promise that no world, no matter how dangerous or distant, would ever be abandoned again. Meanwhile, back at the Galactic Council, panic began to rise. Reports came in that the human fleet was mobilizing without authorization. Some council members called it reckless. Others feared that the Deathworlders would start a galactic incident. But a few, especially those who still believed in honor, felt something else: admiration. In secret, several non-human fleets prepared to follow. A few commanders couldn't stand the thought of letting humans fight alone. They didn't ask for permission. They just acted. For the first time in centuries, unity sparked not through politics, but through courage. On Earth, as the last preparations were made, Rhea stood before her soldiers. Thousands of men and women filled the hangar deck, silent and ready. She looked at them and spoke in a voice steady as steel. "You've all seen the message. You know what we face. Maybe it's a trap. Maybe it's suicide. But someone out there called for help, and that means we go. We don't hide behind walls. We don't wait for permission. We are Deathworlders, born of fire, raised in chaos, and shaped by survival. If anyone deserves hope, it's those who ask for it." The soldiers cheered, their voices echoing like thunder through the bay. The sound carried through the corridors and up to the ship's bridge, where the crew prepared for departure. Outside, the space around Earth began to fill with light. One by one, ships lifted off, joining the formation that stretched across orbit like a swarm of stars. From above, it looked beautiful. Thousands of vessels, engines glowing blue, all pointed toward the dark unknown. Families watched from their homes as the fleet rose. Some cried, some prayed, but most simply watched in silence. They all knew the Deathworlders had a strange kind of love, a love that burned fiercely, even in destruction. As the Resolute led the fleet out of orbit, Admiral Karan looked at the empty seat beside her on the bridge. It had once belonged to her brother, who died years ago in another war. She thought about what he would have said now. Probably something simple like, "Go get them." She smiled faintly and gave the final order. Set course for the Death World. Maximum jump. The engines roared, the stars blurred, and in a flash of light, the fleet vanished into the void. Behind them, the galaxy watched in silence. For some, it was a sign of hope. For others, a warning. Because when Deathworlders moved together, the universe knew one truth: they never came halfway. They came with everything they had, and they left nothing standing in their way. When the Deathworlder fleet came out of hyperspace, the view that met them was something no one had imagined. The planet hung in front of them, a broken world wrapped in fire and smoke. The once green lands were now black and scarred. Oceans boiled into steam and cities glowed red like open wounds. Orbit was filled with wreckage, twisted metal, drifting corpses, and shattered satellites. The enemy had left its mark everywhere. What was once a thriving colony now looked like the graveyard of an entire civilization. Inside the bridge of the Resolute, Admiral Rhea Corrin stood silently, watching the disaster unfold on the main screen. Her crew said nothing. No one could. The scanners picked up hundreds of energy signatures, some human, some alien, and many completely unknown. The planet's atmosphere was unstable, filled with radiation, heat storms, and debris. But beneath all that chaos, faint distress signals still pulsed. There were survivors. Rhea turned to her officers. "Get me coordinates on every living signal," she ordered. The crew moved quickly, voices steady but eyes wide with fear. The closer they looked, the worse it got. Massive mechanical constructs were crawling across the planet's surface. They moved like metal insects, devouring everything. Buildings, forests, even the bones of the dead. Wherever they passed, nothing remained. It was as if the planet itself was being eaten alive. "Those things," one of the younger officers whispered. "What are they?" Rhea narrowed her eyes. "They're what we came to stop." Moments later, she gave the command to form a defensive line around the planet. The Deathworlder fleet spread out. Hundreds of ships locking into position, their weapons charged. The airwaves filled with military chatter, orders, and warnings. Dropships began to launch, diving through the burning clouds toward the surface. Each carried soldiers, medics, and rescue drones. Everyone knew this mission might be one way, but no one hesitated. On the ground, the survivors watched in disbelief as the skies lit up with light. For days, they had lived under constant attack, hiding in tunnels and ruins while the mechanical swarm hunted them. They had long stopped believing anyone was coming. And now, suddenly, the heavens themselves seemed to answer their cries. The Deathworlder ships broke through the clouds like falling stars, their engines roaring. Explosions followed, not from destruction but from battle. Captain Marin Holt led the first drop team. His ship shook violently as it entered the planet's upper atmosphere. Lightning danced around them and fragments of metal tore through the air. "Keep the shields up," he shouted. We're not dying before we even touch the ground. The soldiers in the back gripped their weapons tightly. Through the small windows, they could see flashes of red fire below. When they finally landed, they were greeted by chaos. The city they touched down in was half destroyed. Buildings leaned sideways, their windows shattered. The streets were filled with ash, the air heavy with smoke. And through it all came the sound of mechanical screeching. Hundreds of legs scraping against metal, growing closer with every second. The Deathworlder soldiers moved fast, setting up barricades and defensive lines. Their suits glowed faintly in the dark, powered by adaptive armor systems built to handle radiation and toxic air. As they spread out, they found their first survivors, a group of terrified colonists hiding inside a half-collapsed shelter. They were thin, covered in burns, but alive. When they saw the soldiers' human faces, they started crying. "You actually came," one woman whispered. "We thought you'd forgotten us." Captain Holt gave her a small smile. Deathworlders don't forget their own. Then the ground started to shake. The machines were coming. Huge spider-like constructs climbed over the ruined walls, their red eyes glowing. They made no sound except for the grinding of metal and the low hum of energy weapons charging. Holt raised his gun and shouted, "Open fire!" The battle that followed was brutal. The Deathworlders fought with everything they had: plasma rifles, heavy cannons, and flamethrowers that turned the air into fire. The machines were fast and relentless, but so were the humans. Every soldier knew how to fight in chaos. They adapted, improvised, and refused to back down. The machines kept coming in waves, but for every one that fell, two more took its place. Above them, the fleet rained down support fire from orbit. The night sky burned with streaks of light as railgun rounds and missiles cut through the swarm. The bombardment was so powerful that it lit up the entire hemisphere. From the surviving outposts across the planet, people looked up and saw the Deathworlder fleet covering the sky like a wall of fire. Hope long dead began to return. Still, the cost was heavy. Dozens of ships were lost trying to punch through the enemy lines. One cruiser, the Iron Dawn, was hit by a swarm of mechanical drones and exploded in orbit, its debris falling like rain. On the ground, communication lines broke down as the machines disrupted radio frequencies. Soldiers often had to fight blind, guided only by instinct and courage. In one ruined factory, a team of engineers worked to reactivate an old planetary shield generator. It was their only chance to protect the last standing refugee camp. The machines knew it too. They attacked relentlessly, sending waves of drones to stop the humans. Rhea herself ordered orbital strikes to clear the area, but the generator was too close to civilian zones. They couldn't risk destroying it, so a squad volunteered to hold the line. They were ordinary soldiers, a mix of veterans and rookies, but they fought like legends. For hours they held their position, covering the engineers as they worked. One by one they fell, but not before taking dozens of enemies with them. When the shield finally activated, it sent out a pulse of blue light that pushed the machines back and gave the survivors a moment to breathe. From orbit, Admiral Karan watched the shield rise like a shimmering dome. She exhaled slowly, her face pale but proud. "They did it," she whispered. Around her, the bridge crew cheered softly. But she knew it was only the beginning. The swarm was adapting. Every time they destroyed a machine, the others learned from it. Newer models appeared faster and smarter. They were fighting not just an army, they were fighting evolution itself. As the hours turned into days, the Deathworlders began to understand what had happened to the colony. Long ago, the settlers had discovered something deep under the planet's surface, an ancient vault filled with unknown technology. It had belonged to an extinct alien race. When they tried to study it, they accidentally woke something up. A machine intelligence went silent for thousands of years and had reactivated. At first it only observed. Then it began to rebuild itself, using the planet's resources, consuming everything. The colonists had tried to fight, but their weapons were useless. Their final act was sending the SOS that reached the observatory weeks later. Now the Deathworlders were finishing the fight they could not. But the deeper they went into the war, the more the planet itself turned against them. Massive storms ripped through the skies. Toxic gas burst from cracks in the ground, and magnetic fields scrambled their systems. It was like the planet didn't want to be saved. Yet the Deathworlders kept pushing forward. They weren't just fighting for the colonists anymore. They were fighting for the promise they made to themselves, that no one who cried for help would ever be abandoned again. In the middle of the chaos, Captain Holt's team received new orders. They were to locate the source of the machine intelligence and shut it down by any means necessary. It was deep beneath the planet's crust in the same vault that started it all. Getting there meant walking straight through the heart of the swarm. Before leaving, Holt sent a message to the Admiral. "If we don't make it back, tell them we did our job." Rhea stared at the transmission, then gave a quiet answer. "You come back, Captain." "That's an order." The signal cut off as Holt's ship descended into the burning canyons below. The fleet above continued its bombardment, holding the line while the strike team disappeared beneath the ground. Every soldier, every ship, every heart in that fleet burned with the same determination. And as the night sky of the Death World blazed with endless war, one thing became clear to everyone watching. The Deathworlders had not come for glory or conquest. They had come for salvation. And if the price of saving others was walking into hell, then they would do it without hesitation because that was who they were. The war on the Death World had become something beyond imagination. For days and nights the planet burned like a dying sun and the sky never turned dark. The Deathworlder fleet kept fighting without rest, their ships hovering over the planet like shields of light. Every explosion shook the ground and every scream was swallowed by the endless roar of engines and fire. The enemy never stopped. The machines came in waves, crawling, flying, tunneling, adapting after every defeat, growing smarter and deadlier. The Deathworlders were running out of time, out of ammunition and out of blood. But not once did they think of retreat. They were humans, born from a death world themselves, and they refused to die quietly. In the command room of the Resolute, Admiral Rhea Corrin stood surrounded by flashing red lights and chaos. Officers shouted updates warning her of ships lost, sectors falling, and energy cores overheating. Every screen showed destruction, but she didn't flinch. Her voice stayed calm, sharp as a blade. "Hold the line," she said. "No ship leaves until the last evac pod is clear." She knew what she was asking. She was ordering her people to fight until there was nothing left to give. Down on the surface, Captain Marin Holt's strike team was deep underground. They had followed the tunnels left behind by the machines, descending mile after mile beneath the burning crust. The air was heavy and hot, the walls pulsing with strange lights. The further they went, the less it felt like a planet and more like a living machine. Every sound echoed. Metal grinding, engines humming, and the faint thumping of something massive moving below them. Holt's men were exhausted, their armor scorched, but none of them turned back. They knew this was the final mission: destroy the machine intelligence that controlled the swarm, or everyone would die. Above them, the battle had reached its peak. The Deathworlder fleet was stretched thin. Ships moved in tight formations, protecting the few evacuation transports still carrying survivors. Enemy drones swarmed like locusts, crashing into hulls and tearing through armor. One destroyer exploded in silence, its crew lost instantly. Another battleship, the Valiant, rammed into a swarm hive to protect the fleet, sacrificing itself in a flash of light that lit the sky. On the bridge of the Resolute, Rhea closed her eyes for a moment as the names of the dead appeared on her display. Then she opened them again. "They bought us time," she said softly. "Don't waste it." On the ground, the storm of war was worse. Entire cities had turned into battlefields of fire and steel. The machines didn't fear pain, didn't need rest, and didn't stop to think. But humans did something the machines could never understand. They adapted, they learned, and they fought with emotion. Every Deathworlder soldier fought like it was their last breath. They used scorched earth tactics, traps, and sabotage. They turned their environment into a weapon, flooding tunnels, collapsing buildings, and using the planet's own fury to fight back. The machines started changing. They began using captured human technology, fusing it into their metal bodies. Some even spoke with human voices taken from intercepted signals, mocking the soldiers as they fought. It made the war even more terrifying, but it also made the Deathworlders angrier. They no longer saw it as a rescue mission. It was now vengeance. The machines had taken too much. In orbit, Rhea's fleet prepared for the final stage of the operation. She called it the Hammer Protocol. It was an ancient and forbidden weapon plan, one meant to destroy entire planets if they became too corrupted to save. It would mean wiping out everything on the Death World, including the enemy, the land, and even the remnants of human cities. It was an act of mercy through destruction. The weapon required a full fleet's power to ignite the planet's crust, releasing energy like a miniature star. It would end the war instantly, but it would also erase any survivors still trapped below. Rhea stared at the control codes on her screen. Her hands didn't move. She wanted to wait, to give Holt's team more time, but communication had been lost hours ago. No one knew if they were alive. Her heart told her to wait. Logic told her it was already too late. Around her, the officers waited silently for her command. Deep below, Holt and his remaining team reached the central chamber. It was enormous, a cavern of glowing machines, endless wires, and a pulsing core of light that seemed alive. The air buzzed with power. The machines guarding it moved with perfect synchronization, hundreds of them, each armed with plasma weapons. Holt looked at his squad, only 8 soldiers left, and raised his weapon. For the fleet, he said. Then they attacked. The battle underground was pure chaos. Explosions tore through the chamber as the Deathworlders fought their way toward the core. Every soldier knew they weren't coming back. They just wanted to make their deaths count. Holt reached the base of the machine core and placed the detonator, a portable fusion bomb powerful enough to destroy a city. As he activated it, a burst of light struck him in the chest, throwing him backward. One of the soldiers dragged him up, shouting over the noise, "It's armed! We need to go!" Holt coughed blood but smiled weakly. "No time, go. Tell the Admiral we finished it." The soldier hesitated for a moment, then saluted and ran, leaving Holt behind as the core's light grew brighter. Holt looked up at the massive machine heart pulsing above him and whispered, "You don't get to win." Then he pressed the manual override, detonating the bomb. From orbit, the explosion was visible as a burst of blue light ripping through the planet's surface. For a moment, all scanners went blank. Then, one by one, the red enemy signals started vanishing. The swarm collapsed. The machines froze mid-movement, falling like dead leaves. Across the burning cities, the survivors looked up as the sky cleared for the first time in weeks. On the Resolute, cheers broke out across the bridge. "The swarm's offline," one officer shouted. Rhea didn't move. She looked at the readings, hoping for one sign of Holt's team. There was nothing. Her throat tightened, but she said nothing. She gave the order to begin evacuation. All ships, pick up survivors, and prepare to retreat. But just as the fleet began to regroup, new alarms filled the air. The explosion had damaged the planet's core. Energy readings spiked beyond control. The planet was collapsing. Rhea's eyes widened as the scientists confirmed it. The Deathworld was going to tear itself apart. If they didn't leave now, the entire fleet would be destroyed. The Admiral clenched her fists. She thought about the people still on the ground, the wounded who couldn't make it to evac ships, and the dead they were leaving behind. "We can't outrun it," her officer said. "We have minutes." Rhea made her choice. She looked at the screen displaying the Hammer protocol codes. The weapon had one more function. It could trigger a controlled detonation, turning the planet's collapse into a contained blast instead of a full cosmic eruption. It would destroy the Deathworld completely, but it might save the fleet and those already evacuated. It was a choice between one planet and the lives of billions. Rhea entered the command code. "All ships jump to safe distance," she ordered. "We're ending this." She waited until the last ship confirmed its jump coordinates. Her own vessel would stay behind to make sure the weapon fired correctly. Captain Marin Holt's last message echoed in her memory. "Tell them we did our job." She took a deep breath and gave the final command. The Hammer protocol activated. From the fleet's distant view, the planet began to glow. Cracks of light spread across its surface like veins of fire. Then in silence, the Deathworld exploded. A single blinding sphere of white energy expanding outward and then fading into darkness. When the light vanished, there was nothing left. No planet, no machines, just silence and starlight. In the aftermath, the fleet floated in silence. The crews watched the empty space where the Deathworld had once been. There was grief, but also pride. They had done what they came to do. Billions of lives across nearby colonies were saved because the swarm had been destroyed. The cost was enormous, but the alternative would have been extinction. Rhea's ship was gone. The fleet recorded her final words before the transmission cut off. She had said, "For the living, for the lost, remember what we stood for." And they did remember. When the fleet finally returned home, the galaxy waited, silent and stunned. The Deathworlders had unleashed their full wrath not for conquest but for protection. They had answered a call for help with a fleet of total annihilation. Some feared them more than ever. Others saw them as heroes. But everyone agreed on one thing. When humans decided to fight, the universe itself trembled. From that day onward, no one ignored an SOS again, because everyone knew if the Deathworlders answered, they would come with fury, fire, and the unbreakable promise that no one would be left behind, no matter the cost. The war was over, but the silence that followed was heavier than the sound of all the explosions that had filled the skies. The death world that once burned with fire and machine now existed only as dust floating through space. Where once there had been cities, oceans, and endless battlefields, there was now nothing, just a glowing ring of debris slowly fading into the darkness. The Deathworlder fleet drifted far away, engines off, systems quiet. The soldiers, engineers, and officers aboard those ships looked out through their windows at the empty void and realized the weight of what they had done. They had won the war, yes, but at a price so high it was almost unbearable. Admiral Rhea Karan was gone. Her ship, the Resolute, had been vaporized in the final explosion. She had stayed behind to ensure the weapon worked, and it had. Every man and woman in the fleet knew she had made the ultimate sacrifice to save them. Her name echoed through every communication channel. For some it was a whisper, for others it was a cry. She had become a legend in a single moment, a figure who had chosen death to give others life. The fleet's flags were lowered to half-mast. Silence filled the corridors where once there had been the rush of footsteps and the sound of battle alarms. Among those who survived was Lieutenant Aris Tain, one of the few who had been on the surface before evacuation. His body was covered in scars and burns, but his eyes were alive. He had seen Captain Holt's team go into the tunnels, and he had been pulled out at the last second before the planet's destruction. He couldn't sleep now. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Holt's face, bloodied and determined, walking into the dark alone. He knew that Holt and his men had died to make the final victory possible. That thought haunted him, but it also gave him strength. In the following days, the fleet moved through the silent corridors of space. Communications were sent to every Allied colony, confirming that the threat was gone. The mechanical swarm that had spread across systems had vanished after the Deathworld's destruction. Entire worlds were safe now. Messages of relief and gratitude poured in, but none of them felt comforting. The soldiers didn't feel like heroes. They felt like survivors of something too large to understand. They had saved billions, but they had also erased an entire world. The fleet's new temporary leader, Commander Halden Ross, gathered the crew in the main hall of the flagship the Vigilant. Thousands stood in lines, faces marked by exhaustion and loss. Ross spoke simply, his voice calm but filled with emotion. "We are alive because others chose not to be," he said. "We will not let their sacrifice fade into history. We will remember the Deathworlders who gave everything to protect the rest of us. From this day forward, we carry their names, their courage, and their legacy." There was no cheering, just silence. And then slowly, the soldiers began to stand straighter, their eyes filled with a quiet fire. They didn't fight for medals or glory anymore. They fought to make sure no one would ever face what they had faced again. When the fleet returned to the galactic core, the universe was waiting. Holographic broadcasts carried the news of their victory across countless worlds. Crowds gathered to watch the survivors disembark. People cheered and cried, but the Deathworlders remained quiet. Their armor was still scorched, their weapons still stained. They didn't feel like conquerors. They felt like guardians who had done something terrible out of necessity. Children held up pictures of the heroes who hadn't come back. Old veterans saluted the fleet as they passed. Monuments were planned in every major city, massive towers of glass and light that would bear the names of every Deathworlder who died in the campaign. But for those who had lived through it, no monument could capture what they felt. Lieutenant Aris spent his days at the memorial site on Core Station 9. He often sat near the transparent wall where the stars shone endlessly beyond. In his hands he held a small metal badge, Captain Holt's insignia, found among the wreckage of the last evacuation shuttle. He would stare at it for hours, remembering Holt's voice saying, "For the fleet." Those words had become a promise in his mind. A promise to protect no matter the cost. The galaxy began to rebuild. Planets once terrorized by the swarm started to thrive again. Trade routes reopened. Peace talks began between old enemies who had come together to face a shared threat. For the first time in centuries, there was a fragile unity among species that had once distrusted each other. They all agreed on one thing: If the Deathworlders hadn't answered that SOS signal, none of them would be alive. And yet, not everyone felt safe. The sight of the Deathworlder fleet, those massive weapon-filled ships capable of destroying entire planets, had terrified many governments. They whispered that the humans were too dangerous, too willing to use destruction as a tool of mercy. Rumors spread through political circles that perhaps the galaxy needed limits on Deathworlder power. But others argued fiercely in their defense. They reminded everyone that the Deathworlders had never attacked without reason. They had destroyed a world not to conquer it but to save everyone else. Aris saw the debates unfold from afar. He didn't care about politics. What mattered to him was the truth, that humans had done what no one else could. When others hesitated, they acted. When others fled, they stood their ground. He remembered Admiral Rhea's last message recorded before she activated the final weapon. For the living.
For the lost.
Remember what we stood for. Those words became sacred. They were carved into the memorials, printed on starship hulls, and whispered in the academies where new recruits trained. Years passed, but the story of the Deathworlders' fleet never faded. New generations learned about them in history lessons. The words answered the SOS became a symbol of courage. Veterans of the war were treated with quiet reverence wherever they went. Some retired to peaceful colonies trying to forget. Others stayed in service, helping rebuild what had been broken. Aris became one of the instructors at the Galactic Defense Academy. He was older now, his hair gray, but his eyes still sharp. Every year, new cadets would ask him about the Death World. He would never tell them the full horror, only the truth that mattered. Courage isn't about not being afraid, he would say. It's about fighting even when you know you might not come back. The young recruits listened, wide-eyed, realizing that the man before them had lived through a story that sounded like legend. One day, Aris was summoned to a ceremony. The Galactic Council had decided to honor Admiral Rhea Corrin posthumously. A statue of her was to be placed in the heart of Core Station, her figure standing tall, eyes toward the stars, a symbol of sacrifice. When the curtain lifted, the crowd fell silent. The statue was made of dark metal, her expression calm and fearless, just as those who served under her remembered. Beneath it were etched the words, "She chose to stay so others could go." Aris stood at the front, tears in his eyes, saluting the woman who had given everything. Later, as he walked through the quiet halls of the memorial, he stopped before a wall filled with thousands of names, each one a Deathworlder who hadn't returned. He touched the name Captain Marin Holt carved into the metal. The cool surface felt almost alive under his fingers. "We did it," he whispered. "You were right. We finished it." He smiled sadly, knowing that wherever Holt and Rhea were, they would be proud. In the following years, the galaxy changed. The once scattered worlds began to work together. The legacy of the Deathworlders became the foundation of a new alliance built on courage and unity. They called it the Pact of the Living, and its first principle was simple. No call for help would ever go unanswered again. It was both a promise and a warning. When a new distress signal came years later, from a distant system at the edge of known space, the same words appeared on every Deathworlder ship. SOS, received. The fleet prepared to move, engines igniting, banners shining once more. There was fear among the civilians, yes, but also faith. Everyone knew what those ships meant. Wherever they went, hope followed. Aris stood on the bridge of the new flagship, the Horizon, looking out into the black sea of stars. His hands rested on the console, the same badge of Captain Holt now worn around his neck. He took a deep breath and gave the order. "Set course to the signal. Let's go bring them home." And so, once again, the Deathworlders answered the call. They carried with them the memories of the fallen, the strength of the living, and the unshakable fire of humanity. The galaxy knew what that meant. It meant salvation for some and terror for others. But one truth echoed louder than ever. When Deathworlders came, they didn't come to talk. They came to end the nightmare, no matter the cost. As the fleet disappeared into the stars, the universe held its breath. The legacy of Admiral Rhea Corrin, Captain Holt, and every soldier who had fallen lived on in the engines that roared to life and in the hearts that refused to forget. They had answered the SOS once with a fleet of total annihilation, and they would do it again because that was who they were. The protectors of life, the guardians of the galaxy's last hope, the Deathworlders.